Beloved people of God, I bring you a word from the throne of grace. The Lord is saying, now I will lift you out of the fire. There are seasons in life where it feels as though you are walking through flames. The pressures, the trials, the accusations, the delays, like the 3 Hebrew boys in Babylon. You stand in the midst of fire, gentle, and it seems as if everything around you is designed to consume you. Yet hear me, the fire was never meant to destroy you. It was meant to purify you, to refine you, and to reveal the hand of God that can preserve in the midst of impossible conditions. The fire represents adversity, but it also represents a divine test. Scripture says in Isaiah 4:3-2, when you walk through the fire, you shall not be burned. Gentlemen, neither shall the flame kindle upon you. This means that fire may be part of your journey, but it will never be your destination. You may be in the midst of affliction, but God declares tonight that your season of rescue has come. When God says, gentlemen, I will lift you out of a fire, He is declaring the end of a cycle. It means the season of hiddenness, of pain, of ridicule is coming to a close. He is announcing your transition. The lifting of God is not ordinary, it is supernatural. It is not just escape from danger. It is an elevation into a realm where your testimony will speak louder than your tears ever did. When a man or woman finds themselves in a season that feels like fire, it is easy to assume that life has come to a painful halt. Fire in this sense symbolizes trials, afflictions, challenges, and the many adversities that attempt to suffocate hope and faith. But there is a truth that must settle deep within your heart. Fire is not the end, it is only a process. The flames that surround you are not there to terminate your destiny. They are there to refine you, to prune you, and gentlemen, and to prepare you for a greater weight of glory. God never allows His children to walk through a furnace without a redemptive purpose attached to it. The scripture reminds us in Malachi 3:23 that He shall sit as a refiner and purifier of silver. Gentlemen, a silversmith does not place silver in the fire to destroy it, but to burn away the impurities that diminish its value. The longer it stays under controlled fire, the purer and more radiant it becomes. In the same way, the fire of affliction does not signify rejection. It reveals the careful attention of a father who is determined to bring forth the best version of you. What you call pain today may actually be God chiseling you for a throne you are yet to see. And gentlemen, when you look at the story of the 3 Hebrew boys in Babylon, you discover that the fire was not their end. The king intended it as destruction, but God turned it into a platform of divine elevation. And gentlemen, the very furnace that was meant to consume them became the stage for the revelation of the 4th man walking in the fire. And at the end of that trial, gentlemen, the story did not close with ashes. It opened to a new chapter of promotion, honor, and national recognition of their God. Fire is never final. It is always transitional. You are not meant to die in it. You are meant to come out purified, carrying a testimony that will silence the mouths of daughters. Too often, people mistake fire for abandonment. They ask, where is God when I am hurting? Where is God when doors keep closing? Where is God when I cry at night and my prayers seem unanswered? Yet, if only eyes could be opened, you would realize that the presence of God is most tangible in the fire. He said in Isaiah 4:3-2, and gentlemen, when you walk through the fire, you shall not be burned. He did not promise you would never face it. He promised that it would not consume you. That means fire is a passage, not a destination. It is a road you walk through, not a house you settle in. There is a refining that comes only through fire. Without fire, endurance cannot be birthed. Without fire, the genuineness of your faith cannot be proven. Without fire, humility cannot be fully cultivated. Gentlemen, every man greatly used by God has scars of fire as part of their testimony. The oil that rests upon their lives was not cheaply acquired. It was pressed out of seasons that looked like endings, but were in fact divine processes. Gentlemen, fire has a way of teaching you dependence on God in a manner that comfort never could. When all human support fails and only God's voice sustains you. And gentlemen, then you learn that He alone is enough. The danger of misinterpreting the fire is that you may give up too soon. Gentlemen, some walk away from destiny relationships because of a temporary furnace. Some abandon their calling because the process looked unbearable. Gentlemen, yet had they endured a little longer, they would have discovered that fire was never meant to last forever. Even the fiercest flames eventually burn out, but the vessel that endures comes out brighter, stronger, and ready for the next phase. The enemy wants you to confuse fire with finality, but wisdom teaches you to see fire as a transition. Another thing the fire does is separate the genuine from the counterfeit. And gentlemen, gold-plated metals shine when there is no heat, but only pure gold survives the fire. In the same way, when adversity comes, pretenders and false motives fall away, leaving behind what is true and enduring. Fire reveals your true friends, your true convictions, and the depth of your trust in God. You may lose some things in the process, but those losses are proof that God is stripping away what cannot sustain your next season. When he says he is preparing you for glory, it means he is making you light enough to carry it. Think of Joseph. He endured betrayal, slavery, gentle and prison. Each stage of furnace that could have consumed his dreams. Yet those seasons were not his end. They were processes pushing him toward the palace. Had he not walked through fire, his character would not have been forged to sustain the responsibility of saving nations. The fire may delay manifestation, but it never denies it. God times the lifting of a man so that when the season of glory arrives, the vessel has been thoroughly tested, refined, and proven. Beloved, do not curse your fire. Do not despise your process. What looks like the greatest affliction today may become your loudest testimony tomorrow. And the tears you cry in secret are watering seeds of glory that will soon manifest. Every furnace is temporary. Every flame has a limit. And gentlemen, every pain has an expiry date. What will last is the glory that comes after. And gentlemen, the same God who allowed you to walk into the fire is the one who will hold your hand and bring you out. And when he does, you will realize that you are stronger, wiser, purer, and more radiant than you ever were before the fire. When affliction surrounds a man, when the weight of trials feels too heavy to carry, the human heart often trembles in fear. It is natural to assume that suffering means abandonment, that pain must equal the silence of God. Yet the truth that must be etched deep into your spirit is this: God preserves in the midst of affliction. Affliction does not mean destruction, and fire does not mean the end. And gentlemen, the very flames that look as though they are about to swallow you become the environment where God reveals his faithfulness in the most undeniable way. Gentlemen, the story of the 3 Hebrew boys in Babylon remains one of the clearest illustrations of this reality. Shadrach, Meshach, gentlemen, Abednego refused to bow to the golden image of Nebuchadnezzar, and in their defiance of idolatry, they were thrown into a furnace heated 7 times hotter than usual. By every human calculation, that was certain death. And gentlemen, the soldiers who even attempted to throw them in were themselves consumed by the intensity of the fire. But when the king looked into the furnace, he saw not 3 men consumed, but 4 men walking, and the 4th was like the Son of God. This was no ordinary survival. And gentlemen, it was preservation by the divine hand. What should have destroyed them became the very place of encounter and testimony. This is how God works with his children. Affliction may be permitted, but destruction is never the outcome. He is not only God outside the fire. He is Emmanuel, God with us inside the fire. His presence is most tangible in adversity. While men may flee when your life is under pressure, the presence of God draws closer. That is why you can be surrounded by challenges and still carry an inexplicable peace. A joy that defies logic, a strength that does not come from your flesh. What keeps you alive in affliction is not your ability to endure, but his power to preserve. Consider Job. His entire world collapsed in a moment. His wealth stolen, his children lost, his health afflicted, his friends turning against him, his wife suggesting he curse God and die. Yet in all these things, the hand of God preserved his life. Satan could test him, but he was never permitted to take his soul. That boundary of preservation is proof that God's covenant with you is unbreakable. Affliction can shake your environment, but it cannot erase your destiny. The hedge around your life remains intact even when circumstances seem unbearable. Gentlemen, the mystery of divine preservation is that God does not always stop the fire from being lit, but he ensures it does not consume you. And gentlemen, you may still walk through the valley of the shadow of death, but you will fear no evil, because his rod and staff comfort you. Our preservation is not the absence of trials. It is the assurance that the trials will not have the final word. You may lose some possessions. And gentlemen, you may lose certain relationships, but you will not lose your life, and you will not lose the promise of God over your destiny. The Apostle Paul captured this beautifully when he wrote, "We are hard pressed on every side, yet not crushed, perplexed, but not in despair, and persecuted, but not forsaken, struck down, but not destroyed." These words carry the fragrance of a man preserved by the hand of God. Come, gentlemen, he endured shipwrecks, beatings, imprisonment, hunger, and rejection, yet he could boldly declare that the life of Christ was always manifest in him. The same God who preserved Paul preserves you. Affliction may bend you, but it will never break you. Preservation in affliction serves a divine purpose. Firstly, it silences the boast of the enemy. Satan designs trials to disgrace you, to mock your faith, to make you curse God. But when in the midst of the furnace your song of worship still rises, it frustrates the agenda of darkness. Secondly, preservation becomes a testimony to the watching world. Nebuchadnezzar had to bow and acknowledge that no other God could deliver like the God of the Hebrews. Sometimes your affliction is the platform through which God demonstrates his power to unbelievers. Your survival becomes a sermon louder than words. Gentlemen, thirdly, preservation prepares you for greater glory. The boys who went into the fire came out with promotion. Job, who sat in ashes, later received double of all he had lost. Paul, whose body bore the marks of suffering, carried a mantle of revelation that has shaped the church for generations. Affliction, gentlemen, when endured under the covering of divine preservation, always leads to a lifting that could not have come any other way. Gentlemen, it is also important to recognize that preservation is not just physical. God preserves your mind from breaking under the weight of worry. Gentlemen, he preserves your heart from bitterness when people fail you. He preserves your faith from collapsing when answers seem delayed. Gentlemen, many walk through trials and come out empty, wounded, and bitter, but when God preserves you, you come out whole, stronger, and with a deeper intimacy with him. That is why some of the deepest encounters with God are not found on mountaintops of comfort, but in valleys of pain. And gentlemen, so when you feel the flames of affliction around you, do not panic. Remember that the fourth man is walking with you. Man, remember that what consumes others cannot consume you, because the covenant of preservation is upon you. Remember that you may be in the fire, but you are not alone, and you will not remain there forever. What is meant to bury you will become the warmth of your testimony. The fire may rage, but the hand of God remains stronger. The accusations may rise, but the voice of God is louder. The nights may feel endless, but dawn always breaks. And gentlemen, and when your season of preservation gives way to manifestation, you will look back and realize that the fire was never meant to destroy you. Gentlemen, it was the stage where God revealed his faithfulness, his presence, and his unshakable love in the midst of your deepest affliction. Every fire has an expiry date. No matter how fierce, no matter how prolonged, no matter how consuming it seems, every season of trial is temporary. It is only for a while, and it will surely come to an end. Many times in the heat of adversity, the human heart is tempted to believe that the fire will last forever, that the pain has no end, and that life will remain locked in cycles of affliction. But the voice of God speaks otherwise. He declares that trials may endure for a night, but joy comes in the morning. Nights have limits. Darkness does not last eternally. Every tear, every pressure, every disappointment, every affliction is numbered. And when its time is complete, the Almighty speaks and says, "Enough is enough." This is the confidence that anchors the believer in seasons of turbulence. We do not draw strength because fire is absent. And gentlemen, we draw strength because we know it cannot last forever. Scripture reveals again and again that the challenges of life are subject to divine timing. Ecclesiastes reminds us that to everything there is a season and a time for every purpose under heaven. If there is a time to weep, there is also a time to laugh. If there is a time to mourn, there is also a time to dance. Fire is not eternal, it is seasonal. The same hand that permitted it has already appointed its end. Think of the children of Israel in Egypt. For 400 years they labored under the cruel weight of bondage. Generations were born and died in slavery. And then, gentlemen, and it seemed as though deliverance would never come. Yet at the appointed time, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob arose and declared to Pharaoh through his servant Moses, "Let my people go." It did not matter how established the oppression was. It did not matter that Egypt was the greatest empire of its time. What mattered was that God had marked the expiry date of their affliction. And gentlemen, and when that date came, no force of hell could extend it. In one night, a people who had been bound for centuries walked out of captivity into freedom, carrying the wealth of their oppressors. The fire ended because God said it was time. Job also knew what it meant to endure fire. In a single season, he lost his children, his wealth, his health, and even the loyalty of those closest to him. His nights seemed endless, filled with pain and despair. Yet, even Job's trial was not without a limit. The same God who allowed it also set boundaries around it. At the end of that fiery season, Job received double of all he had lost. His latter years were greater than his former years. His story proves that the fire may rage, but it will not last forever. The sorrow of one chapter can be eclipsed by the glory of the next. Gentlemen, the psalmist declared that weeping may endure for a night, but joy comes in the morning. Notice the language, weeping may endure, but only for a night. Gentlemen, that means even tears are temporary tenants. They cannot own the house of your destiny. Joy is the rightful heir. Gentlemen, when God steps into a season and speaks the word of transition, night gives way to morning and morning gives way to dancing. The challenge for many is that the night feels unbearably long, but length does not equal permanence. Even the longest night eventually breaks into dawn. Gentlemen, God has a way of turning expiry dates into sudden interventions. Hannah had wept for years, mocked and misunderstood for her barrenness. It seemed as though her womb was permanently shut. But one day, after pouring out her soul in the temple, the prophetic word came, and that word ended her season of delay. Within a year, the woman who was once barren was holding Samuel, a prophet to nations. That was her mourning. That was the expiry date of her fire. When Jesus met the widow of Nain, her only son was already dead and on the way to the grave. To the human eye, her fire had ended in final tragedy. Yet with one touch, the procession of sorrow was interrupted and life returned to her son. The expiry date of that affliction arrived in a moment. This is the power of God. He can bring closure to seasons of pain instantly. Men, what seems impossible can change in a breath when heaven decrees it is over. Even in your life, no matter how fierce the pressure, and gentlemen, no matter how prolonged the hardship, God has already set a boundary. There is a decree in the spirit that says this season will not outlive its purpose. If you listen closely, you will hear his voice declaring, enough is enough. Enough of delay, enough of stagnation, enough of cycles of failure, enough of sickness, enough of tears. That is how God works. He allows fire for a while, but he never allows it to consume his children without end. Every trial is time bound. Every furnace has a limit. Every valley has an exit. The wisdom of the believer is to endure, to remain faithful, and to trust that the God who began the story will not allow affliction to write the final chapter. You are not buried, you are planted, gentlemen. And when the set time comes, you will rise again. The testimony of your life will prove that fire is not eternal. It may roar like a lion, but its teeth are numbered. It may shout loudly, but its voice will soon be silenced. And when the smoke clears, gentlemen, you will see that what was meant for evil has been turned for your good, gentlemen. And that every fire indeed has an expiry date. When God steps into a man's life and delivers him from affliction, gentlemen, it is important to understand that his intention is never to return you to the same level where you were before the trial. Gentlemen, the lifting of God is not just escape from pain. It is promotion into new dimensions of glory, authority, and influence. When the Almighty stretches his hand to bring you out, he does so with increase in mind. Gentlemen, he ensures that the season of suffering births not only relief but advancement. To the natural eye, deliverance may look like a simple escape, but in the spirit, it is always transition into something greater. The story of Joseph illustrates this truth with clarity. Betrayed by his brothers, sold into slavery, falsely accused and imprisoned, Joseph endured years of fire that could have destroyed his destiny. Yet when the appointed time came, God did not simply bring him out of prison to return to his father's house in Canaan. That would have been escape. Instead, and God lifted him into the palace of Egypt as second in command, ruling over a nation and becoming the instrument to preserve his family and many other nations from famine. His lifting was not just survival. Gentlemen, it was promotion. It was proof that when God brings you out, He intends to announce you to a higher dimension of responsibility and testimony. And gentlemen, the Hebrew boys in Babylon experienced the same. When Nebuchadnezzar threw them into the furnace, survival itself would have been a miracle. If they had merely walked out alive, that would have been enough to silence their accusers. But God did not stop at escape. The very event meant to destroy them became the platform for their elevation. Gentlemen, scripture records that the king promoted them in the province of Babylon after witnessing the power of their God. They did not just walk out, they walked up. This is the pattern of God's dealings. His lifting is always redemptive and progressive. When God delivers you, gentlemen, He ensures that the affliction does not leave you where it found you. Your scars become proofs of His preservation. And gentlemen, and those proofs open doors that were once closed. David went to the battlefield to deliver bread to his brothers, but after the confrontation with Goliath, he did not return to shepherding sheep. The victory became the stage for his recognition, and from there his journey to kingship accelerated. Escape would have meant staying alive after killing Goliath. Promotion meant being celebrated in Israel and positioned for the throne. Every genuine lifting of God carries this dual purpose. And gentlemen, deliverance from the old and establishment in the new. It is also important to recognize that divine lifting redefines identity. The children of Israel came out of Egypt not as slaves returning to Canaan, but as a nation destined for promise. The Red Sea did not just represent escape from Pharaoh, it represented transition into covenant destiny. That is why God told Moses to remind the people that the Egyptians they saw that day, they would see no more. And gentlemen, deliverance without promotion would have left them vulnerable to being pursued again. But God ensured that their lifting established them as a nation set apart with a new order and a new identity. In the same way, when God lifts you, gentlemen, He gives you a testimony that rewrites your story. You do not just come out free, you come out with influence, authority, and favor. Gentlemen, it is the difference between being healed and being made whole. Healing is escape, but holiness is promotion. Healing restores health, but wholeness restores destiny, reputation, and relevance. This is why many who rise from seasons of affliction discover new doors opening, new relationships being forged, and new opportunities emerging. It is evidence that God does not deliver you only for yourself, but so that your life becomes a channel of hope and encouragement to others. Affliction always carries within it the seed of elevation. The prison was not the end of Joseph, it was the pathway to his throne. The wilderness was not the end of Moses, it was preparation for his prophetic assignment to lead a nation. The cross was not the end of Jesus, it was the passage into resurrection and exaltation at the right hand of the Father. In every case, gentlemen, God's lifting was not mere survival, it was promotion into an eternal testimony that could not be hidden. This truth should transform how you interpret your seasons of pain. Do not despise them as wasted years. Do not see them as mere interruptions. In the economy of God, every trial is a stepping stone. Every fire is a refining chamber. Every valley is a tunnel leading to a higher place. Gentlemen, the enemy intends to bury you in affliction, but God intends to plant you in it so that when you rise taller, stronger, gentlemen, and more impactful than before. When God lifts you, people will notice. It will not be silent or hidden. Gentlemen, His pattern is to make your testimony so visible that even skeptics acknowledge His hand. Nebuchadnezzar could not deny the lifting of the Hebrew boys. Pharaoh could not deny the elevation of Joseph. The Sanhedrin could not deny the resurrection power working through the apostles. Lifting by God is undeniable and irreversible. Once He promotes you, no man can demote you. This should inspire confidence in your current trials. If you are walking through fire, do not settle for just asking God for escape. Ask Him for promotion. Ask Him to use the very affliction as the stage for your announcement. Ask Him to turn your scars into crowns. The God who delivers also exalts. Gentlemen, and the God who rescues also establishes. His hand does not only pull you out, it lifts you up. And when that lifting comes, it is not only about you. It is about the influence your life will carry to others. Your testimony becomes the seed of faith for many who are still in their fire. Gentlemen, your story becomes a beacon of hope to generations after you. That is why God's lifting is always greater than the escape you imagine. He multiplies your impact. He amplifies your voice, gentlemen, and he establishes your destiny on a level you could never have reached without walking through the fire first. When God delivers a man, he does it in such a way that no one can deny his hand. Divine deliverance is not hidden, gentlemen. It carries a signature of visibility that forces both friends and enemies to acknowledge the intervention of heaven. Your deliverance will be public, not because God seeks to entertain the crowd, but because his glory is revealed when men see what he has done in your life. Gentlemen, the testimony of your lifting becomes a sermon louder than any words you could ever speak, and it silences the mouths of those who doubted your God. Gentlemen, the story of the Hebrew boys thrown into the fiery furnace reveals this mystery clearly. Nebuchadnezzar had gathered a multitude to witness their punishment for refusing to bow to his idol. To him, their destruction was meant to be public, an example to others who might defy his command. Yet what happened, gentlemen? The same crowd that gathered to see them perish became the same audience that saw them preserved by the presence of the fourth man. Gentlemen, their deliverance was not private. The king himself had to declare that there was no God that could deliver after this sort. Gentlemen, the fire that was meant to disgrace them became the platform for their public announcement. This is how God works. He often allows affliction to be seen so that his deliverance can be seen also. If the trial was in secret, the testimony might remain in secret. But when the pressure is visible, when the shame is public, when men gather to mock and ridicule, and God waits until the right moment and then lifts you in the sight of all, your story becomes undeniable evidence of his power. Joseph's life carries the same lesson. Betrayed by his brothers, sold as a slave, imprisoned for a crime he did not commit. His journey seemed like a downward spiral. Yet when the hand of God lifted him, it was not done in a corner. And Pharaoh himself summoned him from the prison and set him as ruler over Egypt. In one day, the one who was forgotten by men became unforgettable. His deliverance was so public that nations came to bow before him to buy grain during the famine. The brothers who betrayed him were forced to acknowledge the greatness of God upon his life. This is the nature of divine lifting. It does not hide you, it announces you. Job's restoration also carried this seal of visibility. His affliction had been so severe that his friends sat with him in silence for days, unable to recognize him. His suffering was not hidden, a spectacle that caused men to question the justice of God. But when the season turned, his restoration was just as public. God gave him double for his trouble, and his story became one of the greatest testimonies of preservation and restoration in history. The same people who pitied him had to witness his glory. Public deliverance has a purpose. Firstly, it glorifies God. And gentlemen, when men see what he has done openly, they are left without excuse. They may argue with your doctrine, they may resist your words, but they cannot deny your results. A transformed life is the loudest evangelism. Secondly, it silences the accuser. The enemy thrives on shame, on ridicule, on using your pain as evidence against your faith. But when deliverance is undeniable, his accusations lose their power. The testimony of your lifting becomes judgment against the voices that mocked your trust in God. Thirdly, public deliverance encourages others. Many are secretly battling their own furnaces, their own prisons, their own valleys. When they see how God brought you out, it becomes a prophecy to them that he can do the same in their lives. Your visible testimony becomes a seed of hope for others in hiding. And that is why you must not despise your process. God is writing a story that will inspire generations after you. And gentlemen, even the psalmist understood this when he declared, "He brought me up also out of a horrible pit, out of the miry clay, and set my feet upon a rock, and established my goings. And he has put a new song in my mouth, even praise unto our God. Many shall see it and fear, and shall trust in the Lord." Notice the words, many shall see it. Deliverance is not only for your comfort, it is for the witness of others. God ensures that your rising cannot be hidden, so that men will see and turn their hearts toward him. Think of Lazarus. His sickness, death, and burial were all public knowledge. People mourned, neighbors gathered, and hopelessness filled the atmosphere. When Jesus arrived, gentlemen, he did not raise Lazarus in secret. He called him out of the grave before the watching crowd, and many believed on him because of that miracle. And your deliverance will be the same. It will be too visible to deny, too loud to silence, too clear to explain away. And gentlemen, even skeptics will confess that only God could have done it. This is why you must not be discouraged when your trials seem public, when your shame seems visible, when men mock you openly. If the affliction is public, then the deliverance will also be public. Gentlemen, God will not allow the enemy to have the last word over your life. He will turn the same stage of disgrace into the platform of your announcement. The same voices that laughed will testify. The same hands that pointed in mockery will point in amazement. The lifting of God carries finality. When he delivers, it is undeniable. When he exalts, it is irreversible. He brings you out in a way that no man can claim credit for it. Gentlemen, and no man can argue against it. Your deliverance will be so evident that even your enemies will acknowledge it. They may not like you, they may not celebrate you, but they will be forced to admit that the hand of God is upon you. And that is the seal of divine preservation and the assurance that when God chooses to lift you, nothing in time or eternity can cover the evidence of his power in your life. Every man or woman God chooses to lift must first pass through the fire of refinement. This is not because God delights in pain or affliction, but because elevation without preparation becomes a trap that destroys the very one it was meant to honor. Refinement is God's system of ensuring that when you rise, you can sustain what he gives. It is one thing to be lifted, and gentlemen, but another thing entirely to remain lifted. The fire of refinement strips away impurities, pride, and unhealthy dependence on the flesh, so that when promotion comes, it does not crush you, but instead brings glory to God. And when gold is mined from the earth, it does not appear in its final beauty. It is mixed with dirt, stone, and impurities that conceal its true worth. Gentlemen, it must be subjected to fire, a process that melts away what is unnecessary and leaves only what is valuable. This same principle governs the journey of destiny. God never introduces unprocessed vessels to the weight of his glory. He knows that unrefined strength, unbroken pride, and unchecked desires can sabotage destiny at the very moment of breakthrough. So he allows the fire not to destroy you, but to shape you into a vessel fit for the throne he has prepared. Consider Joseph's story. He dreamed of greatness as a teenager, seeing visions of his family bowing before him. But the Joseph who boasted of his dream was not yet ready for the palace. He needed refinement. He had to taste betrayal from his own brothers, endure slavery in Potiphar's house, and survive the false accusations that landed him in prison. Gently, each stage was a fire that melted away the excesses of youthful pride and dependence on self. By the time Pharaoh summoned him, Joseph was no longer a boastful teenager. He was a refined man who had learned humility, patience, and total dependence on God. His elevation was great, but it was sustained because refinement had prepared him. The fire targets pride first, because pride is the enemy of lasting elevation. Gentlemen, pride makes a man think he is the source of his success, forgetting that every good and perfect gift comes from above. God knows that if pride is not purged before lifting, it will manifest at the peak and ruin everything. And gentlemen, that is why he humbles his chosen vessels in the furnace of waiting and trials. In those moments, you learn that no man can truly help you except God. You learn that applause from men is fleeting, but the approval of heaven is eternal. When the season of lifting comes, you stand as a testimony of grace, not as an idol of self-exaltation. The fire also deals with dependence on the flesh. Human strength may carry you for a while, but it cannot sustain you at the level God intends. Success at a divine dimension demands reliance on the Spirit. The furnace teaches you this dependence. When you run out of options, when connections fail, when friends desert you, gentlemen, you learn to trust the invisible hand of God that never fails. In that process, your confidence shifts from flesh to faith. When lifting comes, and gentlemen, you know that it was not your wisdom, your strength, or your network that secured it, but the God who upholds all things by the word of his power. David's life reflects this pattern. Anointed as king in his youth, he did not ascend the throne immediately. Instead, he faced lions, bears, gentlemen, and the giant Goliath in the wilderness. He spent years running from Saul, hiding in caves, and enduring betrayal even from those he helped. When these experiences were his refining fire, they stripped away naivety and taught him to inquire of the Lord before every decision. They shaped him into a warrior, a worshiper, and a leader who depended on God. By the time he sat on the throne, he was not just a king by oil, but a king by fire-tested character. Refinement also builds resilience. The palace requires more than anointing. It requires stamina to handle pressure and the criticism and the weight of responsibility. Many fall at the height of influence not because they lacked calling, but because they lack character forged in the fire. The furnace seasons instill patience, endurance, and discipline. They make you steadfast so that storms cannot shake you. When you stand on higher ground, what you endure in secret equips you to thrive in public. Another key reason refinement precedes elevation is to align motives. Often before the fire, our desire for lifting may be self-centered, seeking recognition, wealth, or personal comfort. But the furnace purifies those desires. In pain, you discover that true promotion is for service, not self-exaltation. You learn to steward influence as a channel of blessing to others. When God finally lifts you, your heart burns not for vanity but for his kingdom. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego's encounter in the fiery furnace shows this as well. Their refusal to bow to Nebuchadnezzar's idol was a demonstration of refined conviction. They declared that even if God did not deliver them, gentlemen, they would not bow. That is the voice of men whose faith has been tested in fire. And when the Son of God appeared in the midst of the flames, gentlemen, their deliverance announced them to the entire empire. Without the fire, their elevation to a position of honor would not have carried such divine weight. In truth, elevation without refinement is dangerous. Gentlemen, it is like pouring new wine into old wineskins. The container will burst and the blessing will be wasted. That is why God delays some promotions, not because he has forgotten, but because he is preparing the vessel to handle the wine of glory. Gentlemen, the waiting may be painful, the trials may feel endless, but every moment is shaping you. The fire is burning away what cannot survive at the next level. When you understand this, you stop despising the process. You stop comparing yourself to others who seem ahead, gentlemen, because you know that your fire is necessary for your future. You trust that when God lifts you, it will not just be escape from hardship, but entrance into lasting influence. You know that you will not rise as an unprepared vessel, but as refined gold, pure and durable. And in the day of your promotion, you will not collapse under the weight of glory. And gentlemen, because the fire has prepared you to sustain the new level. Every test that life presents carries within it the seed of a testimony, not just for personal encouragement, but for the edification of many. What looks like shame, rejection, delay, or failure today may very well be the platform through which God announces you to your generation. Often, gentlemen, the stage of greatness is not built in the palace, but in the wilderness of trials. And the spotlight of influence is switched on in the very place where tears once fell. The pain you are enduring now is not wasted, gentlemen, because God is weaving it into a story that will encourage nations, a narrative that will remind others that he still lifts, he still delivers, and gentlemen, and he still turns sorrow into joy. When you go through hardship, it may feel like your life is hidden, forgotten, or insignificant. But hidden seasons are God's workshops where testimonies are being prepared. The story of Joseph is one of the clearest examples of this truth. Betrayed by his own brothers, sold into slavery, and thrown into prison for a crime he never committed. It appeared that his life was a string of unending tests. Yet in one day, gentlemen, the same prison that symbolized his pain became the launching pad for his announcement to Pharaoh and the entire nation. His interpretation of dreams did not just deliver him, it preserved an entire generation from famine. Gentlemen, what was once his test became a global testimony that still inspires hope centuries later. This is why the believer must never despise seasons of pain. Gentlemen, God never allows tests without attaching to them a redemptive outcome. What looks like the end is usually the backdrop for a new beginning. Gentlemen, David was forgotten by his own family, left in the fields while his brother stood before Samuel. Gentlemen, Yet that very place of obscurity was where God trained him with the lion and the bear. His test in secret became the testimony that gave him courage to defeat Goliath in public. And the entire nation of Israel witnessed his victory, turning a shepherd boy into a national hero. What seemed like an unending cycle of rejection became the stage for God to showcase his power. The nature of a testimony is that it is never just for you. Gentlemen, God does not comfort you only for your sake, but so that you can comfort others with the same comfort you receive. And gentlemen, your test is designed to give you language that speaks to the pain of others. When you testify of healing, and gentlemen, it becomes proof to the sick that God is still Jehovah Rapha. When you testify of provision, it reassures the poor that God still opens doors. When you share how God delivered you from shame or failure, you become a living witness that what he did for you, he can do for them. Gentlemen, your story becomes a beacon of hope, a light that shines in the darkness of someone else's trial. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego faced a fiery furnace, a test that could have cost them their lives. Yet God preserved them in the flames, gentlemen, and their deliverance became a testimony not just to their people, but to an entire empire. Nebuchadnezzar himself decreed that no one should speak against the God who delivered them. And their personal test ignited global recognition of God's power. This is the pattern of God. The greater the test, the louder the testimony, because he desires that his glory be revealed to many through the vessel of your life. Tests also produce authenticity. Words alone may encourage, but lived experiences carry weight. When someone who has never known pain speaks about hope, it may sound like theory. But when one who has walked through the valley of the shadow of death declares that God is faithful, their words become spirit and life. Gentlemen, the scars of your test validate your testimony. They prove that your faith was not cheap talk but forged in fire. And it is this authenticity that makes your story a beacon for others who are weary and about to give up. Sometimes your testimony will not just inspire individuals but shift systems. Consider Esther, whose test was the threat of annihilation against her people. Her courage to step into the king's presence, even at the risk of her life, turned her test into a testimony of national deliverance. Gentlemen, the decree of death was reversed, and her story became a reminder that God raises voices in strategic places for the salvation of many. One person's trial became an entire nation's testimony. Even in modern times, countless lives bear witness to this principle. Gentlemen, stories of people who rose from poverty to abundance, from sickness to health, from obscurity to influence. Gentlemen, all serve as testimonies that God is still in the business of lifting men. And every testimony has a prophetic dimension. It not only celebrates what God has done, but also declares what he is able to do again. That is why testimonies carry power. They become seeds of faith planted in the hearts of listeners, birthing new miracles in their lives. Therefore, when you are in the midst of a test, do not curse it, and do not conclude that God has abandoned you. Remember that the enemy's plan may be destruction, but God's intention is elevation. And gentlemen, he is writing a story that will not just bring you out, but also put you on display as evidence of his faithfulness. And gentlemen, the very tears that soaked your pillow may one day be the very reason someone else finds strength to keep pressing on. The secret is to endure the test with faith, trusting that God is too faithful to waste pain. Every scar will tell a story. Gentlemen, every delay will speak of his timing. Every loss will point to his restoration. And when the testimony emerges, it will not remain confined to your life. Gentle, it will spread like light, illuminating the path of others who are still walking through their own valley. Your test, no matter how painful, gentlemen, is a worm carrying a testimony. And when the fullness of time comes, God will birth that testimony in such a way that your life becomes a living epistle, read by all men. You will no longer just speak about God's power, you will embody it. Gentlemen, and the very place where you once wept will become the very place where others gather to rejoice at the goodness of God revealed through you